Hi, my name is Mears. My student number is S0253289. This is a video diary for COMM13111, Communication Project B, my work placement with the ABC. Start. 26th of April, my first day. I got there at 7 AM, placed with the newsroom, which consists of Jess Lodge and Dominic Cansdale. My first day I was with Jess Lodge, who explained a lot of the lingo, a lot of what the newsroom goes through, what they do. She explained to me that news headlines from 6:30, 7:30 and 8:30, as well as midday full bulletin. She explained the iNews program as a news. She explained the 26th of April. My first day was with the newsroom, which consists of Jess Lodge and Dominic Cansdale. I got there at 7 AM and I was with Jess Lodge, who explained to me during my first day a lot of the lingo used. She explained to me that news headlines are from 6:30, 7:30, 8:30 and midday, the full bulletin. She explained iNews, the program they use, which is for writing stories. She also explained Netia, another program they use is for cutting audio, cutting grabs. She explained to me that a basic news story is 3 lines. An audio grab is 10 to 15 seconds after the story, a news story is read. A standard story is a copy grab. A voicer is without an interview. Another story is 30 to 35 seconds. Also, she explained to me that a rap is like a voicer, 35 seconds, and always has a short grab in there. The grab that goes into a rap is 5 seconds. She brought me into where the studio is, and she showed me on the computer the cart, which was in a stack, which is about 15 to 16 seconds. She then explained to me, because they had different colours on the program, black and red, the cut is the audio and the D-cart is where it's full. She explained that there's 2 versions for every story. Cut stack is the group of cuts. She then went on to continue discussing with me what a typical morning for them entails. She checks local papers, checks Facebook pages, Twitter pages, other local media, emergency services. She then calls the police station if it's fire station. And if it's a fire season, she calls to check the fire department. After all that, later in the morning, she checks the court lists to see if there's anything of interest in the courts during that day. The Queensland Ambulance reports serious events that they've dealt with over the last 12 hours in the morning, so just make sure she checks there. She also tells me that most stories are written the day before they're aired. She walks into the recording area where she's about to do her news bulletin. She explains to me quickly while she's getting ready to always include 2 extra stories in case you need to fill in more time, because she once had a bit of an issue when she first began. She ran out of time. She finished up her last story and there was still seconds left, so there was dead silence, which is not good. But that morning there was a very interesting error. You have about 4 or 5 different studios in the ABC Wide Bay, and she was in the very first small little booth where they usually read the news bulletins. And for some reason, the computer wouldn't load up the scripts. She had to print them out instead of reading them from the computer, which, according to them at the time, did not happen on a regular basis. So she quickly ran out, printed the pages, and ran into the booth that David Dorset is in. David Dorset is the radio announcer. He does the morning show, the morning breakfast show. Where she says the news bulletin quickly. He sets it up for her, uses the cuts, and she explains to me after we walk out of the room that all news bulletins are live and they use cuts in between, which is pre-recorded material. Then the very first meeting they had that morning was from 7:30. She tells me it's from 7:30 to 8 a.m. that they meet up to discuss what each member of the team will be doing during the day. I was in doing a mock of a news bulletin that day, and Jessica knocked in and said, "Do you want to come in and sit in at the meeting?" So my first descriptive was that I just had my very first meeting. I found it very interesting as I watched them all casually discuss their day events. They were all having a bit of a laugh and went sidetracked for a bit. Then Scotty asked me what I was doing and welcomed me to the team, introducing me as the intern who will be with them for the next 7 or 8 weeks. The meeting then finishes up and I go back with Jess in the newsroom. Jess then explains to me what she has to do for the 8:30 bulletin, which is 2 to 3 minutes long. She tells me that when you have interview audio, it's always named with the talent's name, the interviewee, and when conducting an interview, she says to me to always get them to state their name and title, and if their name is unique or special, get them to spell it and pronounce it as well. She says that a TV news script is 1 minute and 30 seconds long. The midday bulletin is less local, more state or other regions. In my diary, it's 9:30 a.m. and Jess is inquiring about court stories for me to start on. But there's nothing going on that day, so she then explains to me about the programs. Programs packet is 4 to 5 minutes long, and the app the ABC uses is called Reported. Jess comes in, Dominic comes in later that morning because he's on the late shift, and I notice that he seems to be quiet and unsure of telling me how things work, though he gives me audio clips to go through and pick the most important sections of audio written, time-stamped it so he can go through and use ones. I ended up doing 3 audio clips for him where he used several sections that I had picked up as important. I then do an audio clip for Jess, and she gets me to write a small story from it. It was the turtle story. When I finished, she goes through it with me and discusses things that need to be added or changed. Then she takes me to one of the computers and explains to me some of the elements. Again, red is the cart, because the text is in red and black. The red text is the cart and the black is the copy. She explains copy is the name given for what is read, whilst the cart is played through the program. I listed down things I've learnt today, or on the 26th of April. I learned how to write a story in the format for the ABC. I learned how to do a grab, how to cut a grab, how to write a voiceover, how to do a voiceover. I learned that the cart is just the word for the grab being used. I learned that they need to make sure everything fits the timing perfectly. The timing at the midday bulletin has to be spot on because the program is broadcast from Brisbane and then the news goes locally from the state. I finish up on that day around 2:30 and leave and head home. The 27th of April, my second day. I got there at 7 a.m. Jess set up for me to do a voiceover in the booth. I just had the meeting when Jess puts me back in the booth and says about making sure you have everything backed up on material. She then shows me she shortens the stories so she can do them later in the morning for the 8:30 bulletin, and then she gets me to do a bulletin, a recorded one, says I can take as much time as I want. I was a little nervous because I didn't want to muck up very much, but I was also excited to do one because I wasn't expecting to get to do one on the second day. After I finish, she comes and she checks and she gives me some tips on how to sound better in reading a news bulletin. After that, I come back out and she shows me that she checks other regions and areas in their reported app to see what they're doing in case there's anything going on in those regions that can be used for the Wide Bay. It's only my second day, but I've noticed that Jess explains things so much more detailed and easy to follow than Dominic. I'm also finding that most of what they are doing in the newsroom has been in my courses, especially the ones course coordinated by Kate Ames, like my features reporting, my media writing, the advanced course I'm doing this semester. Through my observations so far, I have found another big element which will be included in my essay for top skills a journalist need. She then goes to explain to me that a long story is 4 to 5 minutes and an online article. As I'm sitting and doing more audio cutting and writing down important audio bits, Dominic get calls from Brisbane. They want him to do a pickup for them on a story to do with a former prison guard, where they want lots of cutaways. So I go with him and we drive to North Bundaberg where the guard is. He gets me to help set up the tripod, hold the boom mic and the mobile phone up to the guy's face and just below the camera view. I did notice my arms really started to hurt, which is really surprising, but also I had trouble holding it upright. There's a few times he told me to put it down a bit by hand signals. He then records the cutaways, so it gets him to do certain things like read a book. He went outside to play with the dog, and Tom recorded that, and a few things like that. We then get back to the office, and he shows me how he forwards it to Brisbane. We store it on the camera and forward it to Brisbane. It runs in the camera, and as Brisbane office picks it up, they press record on their end. Not long after that, the phone rings for me, and the council story that I had earlier planned for the off-the-leash dog park, the councilman rings up and Jess puts me into the booth to do a phone recording, and Dom sits in with me. I notice I get really nervous, and I mock up bits, and I look to Dom to see if I'm doing okay, and he nods, and every time there was a bit of silence, he picked up with a question, and I had to repeat it. Then I finish up with the interview. Jess gets me to start on the off-the-leash dog park council story, and I head home at around 2:30. During that day, I've noticed how Scotty interacts with his team. He's really laid back and seems to enjoy having a bit of a laugh, and all his staff members seem to really enjoy working for him. The 3rd of May. This was a really early shift. I was with Kelly Buchanan for the rural report. She asked me to come in for 6 o'clock. The week I was with the newsroom. So I woke up at 5 in the morning and rushed to get out the door, which was when I forgot to bring my food and drinks. So I had this M&M bag which has all my food and drinks in it. I forgot to bring that. And last week I forgot my eraser, so I learned that there's always something that you forget, usually, in the first couple of weeks, because you're so nervous and rushing and wanting to make a good impression, you seem to forget that about certain things. And so I got in at 6 a.m, but apparently Callie had tried to contact me on Facebook, but because I hadn't been on Facebook in a while, I didn't get a message. She didn't get until 10. But when she did, I got explained to that the Australia Plus program is for the international ABC. Radio Australia is international radio. The ABC Wide Bay local range is from Agnes Waters to Monto, Theodore, Kingaroy, Gympie, and lastly the Wide Bay area. As I was waiting for Callie to come in, I was with Ross, who was producing for the morning program, and we went to the meeting and they were discussing interviewing CKU students and student loans, and I offered to sit in and be interviewed. So Ross got me to write down information. That way I would know what to tell him. And then I got interviewed by David to talk about how the loans that are being changed next year. After that, I went back to sit with Ross for a little while as he explained more stuff to me. Then Callie came in, and when she came and I sat with her, she tells me that there is a rural reporter in every station. She puts me to work on the computer, cutting some audio, and she provides me with Windows shortcuts. There was one in particular that I found very useful, which was the Alt and Tab button, which shifts between the windows, the tabs on the computer. Then she takes me into the recording booth where she does her Q&A, and she explains pre-recorded and the information for listeners in simple terms. Then she tells me the requirements of online articles for the ABCs generally around 700 words. She shows me on her computer the template for it has changed recently. All embedded material is to the right. After that, she finishes up one of her articles, which she has been doing for the ABC online. She then explains to me the different types of interviews. She says that an accountability interview is where a person is held to account. It involves a lot of research and is backed up. An information interview consists of the 5 W's and H, basic information. A descriptive and discovery interview is an in-depth personal profile, which also requires a lot of research. I finish up at 2:15 p.m. Forgot to add there. She also explained to me that she's partnered with Mackay, and she works with a lady there on the program, the rural program together. She swaps shifts every 2 weeks between her and Liz being on air, gathering stories and interviews. So 1 week, for 2 weeks running, one of them will be on air and the other person will be collecting and gathering interviews and stories. And then they swap roles. She then tells me the deadlines for her shows, 6:15 and the 12 o'clock. She has 2 managers, she tells me, Scotty and the executive producer. She then explains the difference between her work and the newsroom. The newsroom is a rolling deadline, she says, whereas hers is less fixated, less constant. She can take a couple of weeks to write up her stories, whereas the newsroom requires several every day. Testing. So this is the 4th of May. I wake up at 4:30 this morning. This is the 4th of May. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to come in at 6 once again, and I arrive at 5:45. Kaylee shows me what she does before her show at 6:15. She listens to all the carts and tapes before her show, just in case the person who sent in a tape didn't cut everything out. She's dialed into the other stations, so they air it in those areas. And she's broadcasting 2 more regions today: Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, and Vanderburg. There's 1 minute to go, and she's getting ready. She's just started the show and is going through the scripts, just like Jess does for the morning bulletin. She reads them all before she actually goes on air. And she keeps an eye on the time, so she knows when to run things. She knows if she's running late or if she is on time. If she's running early, she can run a promo, so she goes back to being on time. And whenever there is an issue or mishap with words, she always continues on like nothing happened. She says it's the best thing to do. And she also says that there is a need to know how to swap between the mics. So on her show, and when Jess comes in to read her bulletin, she needs to know what buttons to press to put the microphone to Jess and then put it back to her. She was just reading the weather when she told me that she did have more regions. And she runs a pre-roll before she finishes the program. The pre-roll is so it lets the audience know that the show is coming to an end, it's finishing up. She runs it in the background at first, using the fader, and then brings it in louder. We come back from the show and we have a talk about the show and what she did, and she explains some more stuff before we head out to a breakfast meeting, the exports breakfast meeting, with no other media. She tells me it's good to make context as a journalist and create a context book, which I then think about Kate Ames, how she's always said to me, and well, the whole courses she's taught about context lists and how they're important. We take the ABC car and we drive there. It's only about 10 minutes away. We walk to the breakfast at 7 AM. I'm a little nervous because I've never been to one of these events before, and it is very loud and full of businessmen. Kelly has a notepad and is writing down notes as we sit down at the table, and she hasn't explained to me what I'm supposed to be writing, and I'm not quite sure. So I give her a little bit of a nudge and she looks over at me, and I say to her, what am I supposed to be writing down? So she gives me a quick brief of what I'm looking to write down, and the breakfast starts. They serve a big plate of sausages, bacon, eggs, hash browns, toast, everyone's table, and we eat. As they introduce who will be speaking and what will be talked about in the meeting. So finish the breakfast and put the plate to the side. I write down notes that I think are important, key topics, and the business meeting goes for a number of hours. Then when it finishes up, we discuss who I'll be interviewing. I've written down questions already, and Callie tracks down Colin's Rex, and we go out into the patio veranda, which is just outside. There's some glass windows, and we go out there. We sit down, and the sun is in my eyes, so I find myself squinting, which, in hindsight, would have been better to pick the other table, because it doesn't have that much sun. And I interview her. We finish up. She gives me her card as a contact detail, and then Callie tracks down her contact that she wants to interview. While she's interviewing him, I have a question that pops up in my head. So when Callie says she's almost finished or is about to finish up, I say, can I just ask a question? And so she says, yeah, sure, of course you can. And I ask the question, and he doesn't answer it. He kind of avoids it completely, even though it wasn't really anything accountable or anything like that. We head back to the office, and Callie gets me to write an intro and an outro for the interview I just did. She gets me to write up a little bit of a story for it. And then that gets saved into the system. At some point, Ross calls me over, and he gives me feedback on the outro and intro that I've done, and tells me the improvements that need to be made. And a reflection I wrote down. I've noticed Callie's a little lacking in the ability to supervise this week, as she does get me to do things, but then she goes off to do her own thing and doesn't check back or help me with any work. And says then around 1:30 she says I'm free to leave at any time, after not really getting me to do much, which was a bit of a disappointment for me, which I didn't really understand. And then she says to me about the acro trend, which is on Friday, the next day, that she would be there at 9:30 and come by at any time if I want. It's 1:40 p.m. and I'm going home with the feeling of somewhat being disappointed.
Doing a voice review instead of typing all this information down in a book. Kaylee was late to the agro trend. She said she'd be there at 9:30 and she wasn't. Had to wait for 20 minutes for her to show up in the car. Did some picture taking of her press conference, and also some of the kids with alpacas, and had an embarrassing experience. I was rummaging through my bag while taking pictures of the press conference, and my alarm started going off in the middle of it. People turned and stared at me, and I walked away. Mortified. Kaylee is rather unreliable and doesn't do some of the things she says she's going to do, is not on time most days. Going to be contacting Scott in regards to these experiences later today when I get home. So, 17th of May. I'm doing it on my phone because my laptop video capturing software is playing up and I can't do a video on that, so I'm doing it on my phone. 17th of May. Scotty's said to be in at 7 a.m. and I am to be with Ross for the next 2 days. I got there a little early and apparently Ross doesn't start till 7:30 or 8 o'clock. So I was left to my own devices for that moment. When Ross came in, he explains to me what Brad and him do. They are both features reporters, which he states covers digital, radio, television and social media. He then sets me to do a task to see if there's anything going on in the Bundaberg region. I am to call 3 or 4 people he's given me contact numbers to and ask if there's any sport events happening. I ring each one and each one I get an answering machine. So he says to keep looking. I end up researching and finding another 6 numbers. Then I find on the Cane to Coral fun run, and then Ross takes me to the event that's happening, where I ask Jason Pascoe questions in regards to the Cane to Coral in an interview, and then after I finish, Ross interviews Stuart Bennett for the Cane to Coral. We head back and he gets me to start up my story. He gives me the 2 audio interviews and sits me on my path. It takes me a number of hours. I then leave at 2:40. It is the 18th of May. I get at the ABC at 7 a.m. and I head into the office. Ross is in the production booth with David Dorset, which is the radio announcer for the morning show, breakfast show. And my interview, the Jason Pascoe Cane to Coral, airs at 7:15 a.m. So I'm in the production booth with Ross and he shows me the systems. He talks through the two stations, the two studios. There's a little intercom button that he presses. Then he talks about the little system, production system, what each abbreviation means. TV, for instance, TX means it's going to transmitter. LEM is the link to other stations. They can see all of what each studio does. He explains to me, as field is pre-recorded and sent through the station as though it's live. Then he shows me a little system with 3 different colours, orange, red and green. Orange is the line with no information. Red is where its information has been saved. And green is checked and ready to go on air. So it's the airable version. He then explains to me about a radio station to look up and listen to for ideas on getting into the radio. It's called Radio Game Changers Podcast, and he suggests that I listen to it to get some ideas on how some big radio announcers got into their career, got into the whole radio announcing and got as big as they've got. So it's 7:50 a.m. now. I'm having a break. I'll be going to the court case with Dom. In about 15 minutes. So I quickly eat and pack in my notebook and pencil. Then we head to the court in a bit of a rush. Dom gets into the court building. We go up to the front counter and ask for a court proceeding listing, and the lady asks for his ID, which he gives her, of course. Then we get the list of court proceedings for that day. He goes through the list and ticks off a few that might be of interest or might be important, showing me. And then he heads up and starts speaking to another journalist. The journalist says that he won't come into court till 10. So Dom rings up a prosecutor and asks a prosecutor, and the prosecutor says it won't be the first court case to run. So we quickly get back in the car and head straight back to the office. And Dom calls up another prosecutor, one he trusts better, and they say that he will be the first proceeding of the day. So we rush back and basically run in. We end up sitting in the waiting room for a good hour, nearly. In that time, Dom says about how he should be getting work done So I suggest to him, isn't it possible you could do what you need to do on your phone and send it back to the office? Which he obviously hadn't thought of, so he started doing it. And then the court finally opened. We entered. He told me just before we entered to bow the judge before you go and seat yourself, if the judge is there. And you bow before you exit. We wait for the court proceeding with the accused person, Gary Marshall Frescon, who was being charged with battery for 2 men and assaulting a pregnant lady. And we waited good 2 hours before he actually got to court. And then, because he kind of verbally abused the judge, Gary Marshall Frescon was then escorted out, and we had to wait even longer while they went through other court cases before he was brought back to finish. Once finished though, we got up, we left, bowing before exiting the room, and then we go back to the car. We pick out the video camera for Dom to do a cross, and he gets me to carry some stuff, and helps. I get to help him set it up, both what he's gonna say and the camera ready. He tries a number of times before he's happy with the last attempt. Then we head back to the office. I have some lunch, and then I head off with Dom again, this time to a mobile coverage meeting, which is out in South Clan, which I know the area because I used to live out there, around there, and Dom has no idea where he's going, so I end up giving him directions. And that's where I meet May Poison from Telstra, Leanne Donaldson, and a number of people, and Dom gets there first, so he gets to pre-record interviews before the actual TV crew for Win News and 7 News actually show up. So when they actually do, by the time they do, we finish up and we head back to the office. By that time, I'm told that I can head off. I've done enough for today, so I leave around 2:30. It is the 24th of May. I get in at 7:15, and this week I am with Brad Marcellus. He again explains to me what features reporters do, and we are supposed to go and see a lady by the name of Melinda Holden for the Aboriginal story. But we're attending the meeting where Scotty's asking everybody what they're up to for the day, and there's a knock at the back door. A lady there asks me to move my car, even though I was told to park where I was parked. So I said I would move it, and then when I came back, I showed Brad my camera and I asked him for tips using my cleaning bag that I have a list of cleaning materials in it that I'm not exactly sure how to use, so I asked him about them and he provided some advice to me. And I actually have a flashback memory at the time I'm sitting there at the front desk with him about the Friday before I actually started on my first day. I was on the other side of the glass door that's there, and it's really strange how the perspective can be when you're actually working there to when you come in as just a visitor. It's weird how being on the other side can change it. Brad shows me what he's doing, what he does on a daily basis in the morning, and says that Facebook is an emotional social media platform. And in order to get stuff published on the ABC website, you need to nationalize a local issue, whereas my assignment is to localize a national issue. Anyway, the time for the meeting / interview with Melinda Holden arrives. So Ross, Brad, and I all get in the car. I was told to bring my camera with me, and we arrive. I help put up the signs to let people know that an interview is being recorded by the ABC. And basically I just watch what they do. I did take a picture, but then Brad approached me and said not to do it because it might make too much noise, so I didn't. And then when the interview was finished, I was still just watching. I actually felt kind of bored because I had nothing to do. I didn't want to take pictures and interrupt Ross interviewing her for a radio, or Brad who was taking pictures. So I just tried to observe and yeah, I felt really bored. Then we came back to the office. I had some lunch, and then I made up the questions for Brad for the ABC section of the story for localizing a national issue. Once that was done, I started work on actually creating the article. Around 1 o'clock, Brad, Ross, and I head out again to shoot cutbacks. Little camera shots. And the first place we head to, my suggestion was Elliot Heads. Because they suggested about going to Bargara, they were going to go to Bargara. I suggested Elliot Heads because the Elliot Heads has a lot better rocks, which was the theme, big rock. So we head there and we get plenty of camera shots. Ross gives me a project to capture big rock. Once that's done, we head to the next location, the river, where they have a wall. It has a name in it, but I can't remember the name. And there, I had another project given to me by Ross for pictures, so I took some pictures then. Then we left to go down to the North Bundaberg section, where the river is, and my project there was to capture water. So I did that as well, and we finished up there and we came back and I transferred my pictures, and as we were driving back, Brad provided feedback, picked up a couple of pictures which he said looked really good, and because his history is a professional photographer and he worked for the Newsmail, and so I take his feedback very seriously, and he gives me a tip on how to hold the camera properly. And then I leave at 3 p.m. The 25th of May. It was a bad start to the day, as I got there at 7:20 after rushing out the door and having to stop for a train and feeling really just a bad, awful start. That day we were going to the worm farm, and I was going to, for the very first time, go and see what an actual worm farm is like. He got me to write up some questions. He said that he might get me to interview him. He would interview him in the main sections, but he might actually get me to do my own. We headed off at around 8:30. Left for the Jinjan Kookaburra Worm Farm. And on the way, we saw a big pond full of pink water lilies. He pulled off to the side of the road and we took some pictures of that before continuing on. We reached the Kookaburra Worm Farm and entered and met George Minjan, who immediately, you can tell his passion for worms and how he got into what he into. And Brad introduced me as the ABC Wide Bay intern. And as Brad was filming cutaway shots for his Facebook post, I started talking to George Minjan, asking him how he got into the job he's in currently. Started really talking to him about his passion for worms. And then Brad finished his little cutaways of the worker that was in there packing away things for the business. So then we got the tour of the actual breeding room, and George was holding worms as we were taking pictures, and his wife, Kath Minjan, comes in. He introduced us to her, And she's with us for the rest of the time we're there. And George shows us the birthing of worms, little eggs, which I got pictures of, and there was actually one particular picture I was really happy with. I really liked it. Which is actually on the ABC article that was published. We then went outside and he showed us what food source the worms have, which is actually a bunch of horses who eat specific grass that is grown, and their manure is what feeds the worms. And then Brad did his interviews. I took a couple of pictures of him interviewing him, and I spoke to Kath while he was interviewing George, because I didn't want to interrupt or distract or anything. And then in between recordings, I'd ask George some questions, and again I could really see the passion that he had for worms. When that was finished, we headed back to the office. And Brad got me to pick 4 or 5 pictures that I liked, and he got me to start on the worm farm story. I left at 3 p.m. It is the 30th of May. I got there at 6:50. Bear is away, sick. Scotty's on leave. Dom is also in Melbourne, so there's not a lot of people in the office today. I will be working with David and Brad today. And while I'm waiting for my pictures to upload, so I'm listening to the show. Brad is ringing up Chamber of Commerce for the interview on the 7.8 million contract to give jobs a boost for Marlborough. And he set me a task doing research on 5 things people might be interested in talking about in the week. So I come up with 5 things. The Bundy Show, Lee Kernaghan at Moncrief, the Very Hungry Caterpillar, the Blue Water Music Festival, and Relish, Fraser Coast. A couple of those had already been done, which Ross and Brad both said meant that I was on the right track of thinking, that I was on the right track. Brad got me to do up a couple of questions for the Very Hungry Caterpillar manager, the Moncrief manager. He gave him a call and said that he was going to send me over to do an interview. Brad then showed me how to work the Mears, which is their recording device they use, and he sent me on my way, all by my lonesome. My very first time of interviewing as the ABC intern without supervision. Of course, he put the Mears around my neck, the microphone and the headset, so I was walking in the streets with that dangling from me, which was a bit strange, and people would give me some really weird looks, but I just kept walking anyway. And I got there, I did my interview, I stopped it, saved it just how they showed, and came back. And Brad uploaded it. And from there, I made a little story. I did up an intro and an outro and a little background. And it was played the very next day. I headed off at 2:20 p.m. It is the 31st of May 2017. I came into the office, the ABC office, at 5:45 a.m. I was sitting in with David in the studio. Was going to sit through his whole program with him to see what he does and to see how he reacts, and just to basically sit and learn. He shows me how everything works. He rings up the weather to record through the station. He shows me the cuts, the songs, the promos in the computer. What I found really interesting was he mixes old classics with hits, which no other station apparently does. I find Dave is really funny and sarcastic, and he's just started his show. I got to just pick a song for David. He likes the one that I picked and was going to play it, but it was too long, so he got me to pick another one. And then we have a little in joke about the news, because he says he thinks there's too much news on the ABC morning program. So every time the news came on, he said, "And more time for news," which I found really funny. Then David said he wants me to be his producer, and we came out for the meeting where we learnt about suicide prevention program they're running, and David wanted me to write up some questions for him to ask, and we'd work on it together. He liked the questions that I asked, so when he came back to the office and did a pre-record interview with the lady on Lifespan, he asked questions that I had written up for him, which was then later aired. After that happened, came back out, and I went into the production booth where Scotty was, and Scotty showed me how to work the phones and told me what to do as the live talkback radio section came on, where he asks people a couple of questions and people ring up, and if they get it right, they get a prize. There was only one person that rang, but in that one time I noticed the mistakes I made from being nervous. After that, I came back out and I started looking up things that David could run the next day. Or actually no, on Friday, I believe it was. I went home at 2:30. Today is the 7th of the 6th, 2017. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. I am with the newsroom this week, and Jess gets me straight into doing stories for her, 8:30 bulletin. Then 2 for midday. And then she gets me to look into a story for another day. She likes the story I picked, who I want to talk to, and then she tells me how to write out the interview email. So she gets me to write out an interview. She gets me to write down details to put in an email to get them to contact me back in time to do a pre-record phone interview. I then try and set up a meeting with Scotty to discuss my next semester's work placement, but he's busy. Then I write up questions for Ross Sommerfeld describing the incentive program. I write up 3 stories for Jess to use. She says to me about how I'm writing more for the production team. So basically, she's saying that I'm writing more for the morning program and for programs than for news, which I find really strange and funny because I only just got used to working with the programs team that I have to readjust for a newsroom, which takes me a bit, and I don't quite get it, I don't believe. By the end of the day, she has to rearrange several things I've said and add bits because I miss sections. I leave at 2 o'clock. It's the 8th of June. I got here at 8:15. I started a late shift. However, due to having a doctor's appointment later that day, I was unable to do as late a shift as originally planned. Dom got me straight into cutting some grabs for him. I will be leaving to go to a meeting with Scotty on why the Bundaberg region promotion night is important. So I write up some questions for that after I cut the grabs for Dom, and then we pretty much leave. I come back. I do up the stories for the interview press conference that I attended with Scotty. It's 12 o'clock and I was sitting there bored for nearly 30 minutes. Dom said he'd take a look at the stories that I wrote. I've been trying to get a meeting with Scotty, but it keeps being pushed back. It's super hectic for Dom at the moment, so he doesn't really have anything for me to do. I watched him do the live cross for Maryborough prison incident. I found he was unable to supervise or give me anything else to do while he tried to do the online story for Brisbane. And I noticed throughout the whole day that his stress level is really high. Although I did do a couple of stories, however, I did notice how much the change in my work at the moment. to the point where I actually don't think that it's recognisable as my own work, which is a bit deflating actually, but I do understand that it needs to be up to the quality required, and at the moment I'm not producing the right quality. From my observation of Dom during this day, and not having very much to do due to the fact of not knowing what set tasks I had, I found myself observing the fact that the ability to cope with pressure, deadlines and stress is really important in this job. I was sitting around bored for the last hour. I couldn't leave early because my car broke down and my mum had dropped me off and my mum was picking me up. So I had to wait for my mum to pick me up to go to a doctor's appointment. So I left there at 4:20. It is the 14th of June. I got here at 7:10 in the morning. Early. So I hang out with David. And I discuss with everybody taking a group photo, as today is my second last day at the ABC for this semester. Everybody agrees to it, but I have not yet set a scheduled time. I leave with Brad to cover a interview with the dad of a cancer girl, about 4 years of age. And we leave first thing after the meeting that Roscoe holds, because Scotty is busy getting his stuff done ready so he can leave for Brizzy after only coming back from Sydney the day before. We head out to the place where the cancer father is. It's a business, I believe, by the name of the 5th Acres. We arrive there and we get a tour of the area, which lasts a long while, which discuss what they plan to do in the future, extensions, when the business will be up and running. Really long details, and of course I was wondering during most of this whether or not the interview that I was told we were going to was this person or someone else. And of course, turns out it was the cancer dad. After the tour and after Brad took some pictures, we set out on the patio because the inside was a bit too echoey, and we did the interview out there. However, the background noise of birds was a little much for the feed, and the interview went for around 18 minutes, which we filmed. And then on the way back I discussed with Brad what happened and if it could lead into a story to be published on the ABC, and if so, we just started discussing story titles, and we came up with a catchy phrase, I believe, for the title, and I will be working on this during my holidays, hopefully to get it published in my next semester of work. Anyway, we came back. I researched the hospital contact details for the hospital that the little cancer girl went to, and also I got contact details for the Leukemia Foundation accommodation which they stayed at, and contacted them. But after I contacted them, I didn't hear back from them that day. So, basically what I did was I got the audio clip of the interview from the cancer dad and just typed up some facts and some information ready to make a start on the article as soon as I got the other interviews. And then I left at 3 o'clock. With Ross giving me homework for the next day to research 3 events happening in the region. That would be for our target audience. He also gave me the ABC training guide and apologised for not giving it to me earlier. He said to read as much of it as possible and bring it back the next day. The 15th of June. I got there at 7:25. I had done my homework. I'd come up with 7 events that are happening in the area for that day, for Friday and for Monday. And I had also read half of the training book for that night. I came back and I discussed all my ideas with Ross. There were 2 particular ones that I had taken a liking to, but he told me that I need to look past just the basic what's happening and find the news angle. So he told me to pick 2 particular ones and research them and find the story that's actually behind them. So I spent a number of hours in the morning researching the Mary Poppins Festival and the Gin Colour Me Happy Fun Run, and found 2 interesting news angles. I then found out who to contact, who the organiser for them was, and from there I went back to Ross, and Ross said to give them a call, and went to organise the interviews. I called up both, and both suggested to provide further contact details for them to get back to me. And while that was happening, I was writing up my stories, questions, and trying to write up an intro. When we got information back from both of them, I then set up the times and dates for the Mary Poppins Festival interview, and then the Gin Colour Me Happy Fun Run for later that day. I was then also looking for what else was going on to write up another story, when I was set another task. That task was to write a background page of information for David for his Monday live interview with the organiser of the Mary Poppins Festival. I wrote a background or page of information and some questions for him to ask, as well as an intro, which took me a while. And then I had lunch, I came back, he gave me some feedback on the page of background information, and I worked further on that. Then I finished that up, sent that back to him, he took a look at it, gave me some feedback, and then we basically had to leave for the Gin Colour Me Happy Fun Run interview, which I had previously set up a start to an intro and some interview questions. And we walked a couple of blocks to outside the council office, and there I asked the lady, the organiser of the Colour Me Happy Fun Run, as well as the youth development program that was happening in April. Her name is Andrea Bax, and while I was there, just finished up my interview when the mayor walks out, and so Ross says, "Oh, get your mic up and interview him, a surprise interview." So I did that. I asked him a question and he left, and then instead of heading back to the office, I did a stand in a bridge to put the two stories together. Basically just describes that I'd been in an interview, where I was, and that Jack Dempsey came out, and that I was asking him my first question. Once that happened, we walked back to the office. I finished typing up my introduction for Mary Poppins and the Gin Colour Me Happy Fun Run. Once that was done, I headed off. It was my last day. I made sure everyone had given me the feedback that I asked for in an email, and I left. My very last day.